Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
All right, great to see you.
Can we start with knowing me, Tony Wilson, knowing you, Steve Coogan? How is that?
Let's rise above that, shall we?
OK, move the set, please.
I've got to see Debbie about shoes.
Should we take this nose off now, or should I do the makeup try?
Hey!
Why did we want to spend a year of our lives making this film?
This is funny.
Cock. That scene, because it looks so cheap, it actually makes it funnier.
You know, originally I was going to play Tristram.
Yeah, that's when it was going to be a sitcom.
He does a fantastic impersonation of you.
Oh, you're so dirty.
I think he wanted the realism.
He wants realism?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a grown man talking to the camera in a womb. OK.
Hello. Knowing me, Gary Wilson, knowing you, Steve Coogan.
Do you remember anyone called Heather?
Everyone back at the office wants to run the story about the girl.
Yeah. She's a lap dancer.
But she's saying some stuff about the... I don't know. Anyway, Steve.
Jesus Christ! Rob now has a bigger part than me.
But he hasn't.
He's got a battle scene.
I'm Spartacus!
He's got Agent Mulder from...
Scully. Hi.
Hello.
The funniest thing he's done for years.
So that's Alan Partridge. I don't speak like that.
I don't talk that way. Yes, I do.
Stop it!
I'm quite perspiring with anticipation.
Good Lord, what is this story all about?
Cock and a bull story.
It's Steve Coogan, Rob Brydon. In fact, if we went alphabetically, which I think is the only fair way, it would be Rob Brydon, Steve Coogan.
Yeah, but that would just be ridiculous.
The pod bay doors are open. Thank you very much for joining us. I am your host, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com. Here with my co-host, Jerry Dean Trismegistus Roberts, armchair critic at ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com, and OverThinkingOscars.com. How are you today, Jerry?
I'll get to it eventually.
Today we are talking about the ultimate expression of procrastination in both literary and cinematic form. Tristram Shandy, a cock and bull story, Michael Winterbottom's film from 2006 starring Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon, an adaptation of the very old novel, 1756 novel, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, written by Lawrence Stern, and serialized around that time. It was printed between, I think, 1756 and 1762. So it's been around a while. And
Yeah, it's called Tristram Shandy, a cock and bull story. And believe me, it has all three. It has Tristram Shandy, a cock, and a bull.
Yes, and they get that out of the way really quickly.
Yeah. That actually bookends the movie.
It does.
Starts with a cock and ends with a bull. You'll have to forgive the language in this. It's going to be impossible not to talk about this without talking about some scurrilous subject matter. So
Oh gosh, and the basic concept is the book is notorious for being so long and odd that most people start it and never finish it. It's like David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, if you want a contemporary comparison. Because most people will start that and they'll be like, this is too long, and they abandon it, even though it's apparently brilliant. I've never even attempted it.
It's so long that when I got it, it was in serialized form. It was actually cut up in pieces. I don't even understand that.
But I have actually read The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, from beginning to end. I am one of the rare people. It took me about 9 months in 2007 or 2008. It took me most of the year, but I finished it.
I didn't. I'm still working on it. I started around 1994, and it became a toilet read, and I think I abandoned it in about 2001. It's sitting on my shelf right next to the Brief History of Time.
Well, the
It's
same.
a book that millions have bought and dozens have read.
Yes, yes, yes.
Dozens have finished.
That is very true. That is very true. I read this and I was on a big kick. After this, I read Tom Field's Tom Jones, which is also really long. And then right after that, not too long after that, I read Don Quixote. So I kicked a lot of things off my bucket list that were just ridiculously long. But
And yet, never read a Stephen King book.
yes, I've never read a Stephen King book. Still to this day. But
Okay, well,
how did you I came to the movie because of Roger Ebert's glowing 4-star review, and I'm like, I need to see this. I rented it
came
when
to this movie because of you.
yes.
I read Roger Ebert's glowing 4-star review when the movie came out,
Mm-hmm.
and said to myself, I'll get to the movie eventually. You have to know, we keep making this joke. This book is about procrastination.
So the book is basically Tristram Shandy, as written by Lawrence Stern, is setting out to write the story of his life, his autobiography. And the book is like 650, 750 pages long, and by the end of it, he just gets to his birth, because he gets so sidetracked with all the things that were happening before he was born, and some things that were happening to him in his contemporary life. Like, at one point, he's being chased by death, so he gets a post-chase, and he's running across Europe to get away from death. Because he came to him one night, and he said, "No, let me finish my chess game," and then he just ran out and tried to get away, which is one of the things that I am sad is not in this movie, because that is hilarious.
Well, they banned the movie into this. It's a book about a guy trying and failing to write a book about his life story.
Right, and he
The
ends up
movie
telling his
is-
father's story, he ends up telling his uncle's story, he ends up telling everybody's story
There's a
but
lot
his
of
own.
side roads.
And yeah, and the movie, it starts off telling the story of Tristram Shandy for a good half hour of a
But
90-minute
it's about
movie.
the making of the film Tristram Shandy,
Right, but
which it eventually.
it's a fake documentary, because
Yeah.
Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon play themselves. Everyone else is an actor, and so they start making the movie, but they never finish it. They never get around to finishing it, because there's this other fake documentary that's going on. This is one of the best adaptations of the spirit of a novel that I have ever seen. It's remarkable. I rented this when it first came out on DVD. I rented this from Blockbuster when Blockbuster still existed. And I watched it like 3 times in one weekend, and promptly bought it.
This is not the only time I'm ever going to watch this, because I will watch this again.
It's so.
What?
Go ahead.
What I got from it.
Yes.
This is the first time I'd ever seen. I saw this movie literally like 12 hours ago. For the first time. I finally got around to it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I gave you God's Not Dead. You gave me Tristram Shandy.
Mm-hmm. And The Wild Bunch, and Hard Day's Night, and...
He's never going to stop reminding me of that.
Nope.
And I gave him Sweet November.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also gave you Dreamcatcher and The Village, so...
Yeah. And he's about to lob Truffaut on me, too.
Yes, I am.
So, what I got from this, essentially, was that it's about the making of the filming of this book. Which would be impossible
virtually,
to film,
yes,
because it's a book about procrastination.
Yeah.
The movie, they're trying to make this documentary, but they keep taking all these side roads. There are at least 3 instances where he stops, where Steve Coogan stops the movie cold so that he can get back on track and talk about his birth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talk about Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon are basically playing versions of themselves. These two gigantic, massive egos. They're in this war of one-upmanship. And the movie opens with a 3-4 minute conversation in which they're talking about their billing. And Brydon keeps talking about what color his teeth are.
Right. It's been said as not white. And Coogan is like, yeah, I would agree with that. I would.
You know, it's like coloring. It's the same color you would color a baby's room with.
He said, I think it's very soothing. And he said, I don't want my teeth too white because I don't want to get bogged down in that leading man thing. And Coogan's like, you don't have to worry about that at all.
And they do this wonderful thing at the end of the conversation where they're talking about their billing.
Yeah, he goes,
and
it's a co-lead.
They'll do it alphabetically. They cut to the credits, and it's in order of appearance.
Yes. And the first shot was Steve Coogan's face.
Yeah. And the movie stops. There's points where the movie stops cold. They'll freeze frame everything, and then Coogan just steps into the thing to explain to you what's going on, or to talk about it. And there are these moments where, you know, it's not a narrative where it goes from one end to the other. It's a jumble of stuff.
Yeah, it just goes back and forth, and I also love how Coogan as Tristram Shandy, he also plays his father, Walter Shandy. But when he's Tristram, he comes out to basically narrate, but he uses examples that are very anachronistic. Like he quotes Groucho Marx, and you know, who would not even be born for 250 years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a modern retelling, but placed in the time frame. There's all these weird anachronistic touches, and then all of a sudden, during the birthing scene, there's a cut, and then they're all actors, and they go about the business of going to the next scene and stuff like that. It's
Oh, the birthing scene. That goes on and on and on and on. Poor actress.
It's like 20 minutes.
Poor actress is like screaming, and just she's having the baby, and she keeps calling for Susanna, who's the midwife. And she keeps calling for her. And it's just this poor actress.
Who is?
And meanwhile,
I was gonna say the housemaid is played by the woman that played Moaning Myrtle in the Harry Potter movies. Shirley Henderson, who is also the friend in.
Here's where my American brain is. My dumb American brain. I'm looking at this cast, and I'm separating them by the actors I've seen in Harry Potter and the actors I've seen in Lord of the Rings.
Because not only is she in this, but the gentleman that played Mr. Weasley is also has a bit part in this as a historian who's trying to make everything authentic, which is a brilliant, hilarious.
I think one of my favorite characters in this movie is Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
He's playing himself as a literary theorist.
Yes.
Just like
talking about the importance of the novel, and then they visit where Lawrence Stern wrote the novel, and this historic house, and and he's
it's a whole lot of who cares,
right? Isn't he he's the curator there, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I haven't watched it in a couple of years. I got about a half an hour in before we started recording this, and it just brought everything right back into the front of my head. The Steve Coogan getting into the transparent womb, and
oh my God, that is like that reminds me of the Stonehenge rock in This is Spinal Tap. You know, it just doesn't work. And it's like,
it doesn't at all.
Because they're doing this thing where they build this giant live womb with a glass partition audition.
So that he can
And they
narrate
lower
from the
him
womb as himself, but...
They lower him into it upside down in a harness. And he's inside this thing, and it's like, they wait until they get him inside of it. And his face is turning red because he's upside down.
Mm-hmm.
They wait until they get him inside of it to tell him that when they're filming it, he has to be naked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they go to pull him out of it because he's getting uncomfortable and he gets stuck. And they keep pulling him up out of the thing, this harness. But let's go back for a second because I want to talk about when he plays his father earlier. They keep doing this. They keep going back to this. He plays Walter Shandy, father. And Bryden plays his Uncle Toby, who has this unfortunate wound. And they ask him,
he was fighting. He was fighting in
Flanders. And he says, "Where were you shot?" And he says, "Just beyond the asparagus."
So yeah, what happened is that he was fighting in the Battle of Namur at Flanders for the British Army in, I think they said it's 1698. And he has become obsessed with recreating the battlefield. So out in the garden, and it keeps expanding. In the book, it gets to be like miles long.
Yeah.
And it keeps expanding. It's taking over the grounds because he lives on the grounds with his brother Walter. And so they keep asking him, "Where were you hurt?" And he goes, "I'll show you the very spot. I was shot." And he goes over to where the ramparts are and the cannons. And he goes, "I was shot in this trench at 9 on the clock." And he will not say, because he got injured in the groin. But he's so modest that he can't actually say where he was hit, what the damage was, if everything still worked. Like, he will not talk about
when
the
he gets
actual
shot
injury.
and they're putting him on the stretcher. They keep the doctor, the field doctor, keeps asking him, "Where were you shot?" And he keeps whistling because he won't say it.
He won't say it.
He keeps whistling because he won't say it, and it's just like.
And then his aide, which is the captain, who's still with him at that point, years after, he's like, he's too modest to say where he was hit. The doctor's like, how could he be so delicate of character to not name his privates, and he's fighting a war.
There's this whole flashback where they have this kid who I think is it Tristram when he's a young boy and he goes to urinate out the window.
Yeah.
And the window slams on his penis and it's like
circumcising him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Corporal Trim took the weights out of the sash to contribute to the Battle of Namur scale model that is outside, and it's so fun. And not only are there bits where the documentary takes over, but there are bits where they actually stop. And Steve Coogan as Tristram Shandy says, "This is just an actor playing the young me. I would have done this better. I can't be me until maybe I'm 18 or 19. And he's obviously in his mid-40s. And the kid comes up and he starts talking to him, and he's like, "Well, how would you do it?" And he talks how he would have done it, and then he goes, "Yes, but I was actually going for a comedy." And then he starts screaming, and he goes back into the scene.
And he so dismisses Bryden because he's like, he calls him, he's basically, "You're a featured co-lead." And so we'll see in the edit.
Well, he's like, Yeah, I'm a co-lead. It's a co-lead. It's not a cameo. He's like, no, it's not a cameo. You're a supporting part. And he goes, but I'm in the whole thing. He goes, it's a supporting role. It's a co-lead. And he goes, well, we'll see we'll see after the edit.
I want to talk about. I've got to tell you, there's a scene in this movie that stopped me for about 5 minutes. Not only so I could laugh, but so I could go back and watch it 3 or 4 times. It's the scene where they're going back and they're looking at the rushes.
Mm-hmm.
And they said in the screening room, if you don't know, the rushes are basically the raw footage of what you shot that day.
Or the day before.
There's no music. There's no,
right.
There's no editing, nothing.
Just take after take after take.
Right. And you generally, it's just kind of look at the raw footage of what you got. Well, the raw footage that they got that day was the filming of the battle. But it's generally just these actors. The footage they look at are these actors who are just wandering around. Some of them, I think, are on their lunch break.
In this mist of...
In this mist. And they're all dressed in period clothing. And he's just standing there looking off in the distance, and you see this cannon fire, and nobody's really doing anything. And Bryden's like, well, I don't think Mel Gibson's going to lose any sleep over this.
And then they decide they're going to...
Oh, God, wait. Then they show the actors who are standing around. Coogan has a great line. Just show these actors. And Coogan is like, he's literally leading tens of men. That stopped me for about 5 minutes.
And they decide they're going to reshoot the battle on a grander scale. But it's going to cost so much money that they had to cut something else out. And they were going to cut out the Widow Wadman, who was another side story with Uncle Toby post-war, that he started courting the Widow Wadman, who was played by Gillian Anderson. And
who she's obsessed with.
Yes. And
the actress, not the character.
Right. In the fake documentary, he's obsessed with Gillian Anderson. So they do this whole part with the two of them, but that's the part that's supposed to be cut. And then you find out, in speaking with Steve Coogan and the PA Jennifer, Coogan hasn't even read the book. He's trying to start it from the beginning when they're like weeks into production, and he's trying to competently talk with this girl who's read it multiple times and loves the story, and he can't hold a conversation with her. He's trying to bluff his way through.
Yeah, is this where he says it's a postmodern story before there was any modernism to be post about?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
This is the Naomi Harris character.
Yes.
Who comes in? She plays a woman named Jenny, and she comes in and she's literate and she knows movies and she just completely blows these guys out of the water because she knows so much more than they do.
Yeah.
They are all ego.
Yes.
And they've spent so much time being so egotistical, worried about their teeth and worried about their models. They don't even bother to find out what they're filming.
Right. They have no idea.
She comes in and she gives this beautiful dissertation about what war really is.
Right.
Naomi Harris, by the way, is one of my favorite actors.
She's
I love her. Yeah.
She's wonderful.
If you know her, most people probably know her from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
She played the Sea Witch, Tia. She was also she was actually got an Oscar nomination this year for Moonlight.
Mm-hmm.
And also she's in James Bond. She plays Miss Moneypenny.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got the best part in this because she's like the smartest person. You get the sense she should be writing and directing this.
Right. Because the writer, you get the feeling that he doesn't really know what he's doing. The director doesn't really.
None of them do.
None of them really have a concept of what's going on with this story. But she gives this impassioned defense of the Widow Wadman sequence, and and Coogan doesn't
And
even
they
know
don't-
who she is, and
They don't know what it's all about. I love the scene where they find out that they're so impressed that the Tristram Shandy book is number 8 on the Observer's list of the greatest books of all time, only to find out that it's listed chronologically. It's like they have done no research at all.
none.
Here's the funny thing. As I'm watching this, and I'm realizing these blowhards have no idea what they're doing. Because they're so interested in getting the pieces right, getting the costumes right. They're so interested in all this other stuff. I got the feeling this is how most movies are made.
Yeah, I know.
When I see a superhero movie that falls apart, like Batman v Superman or something like that, I get the feeling that the writer and the director and the producers have vaguely once heard of these characters. And they've studied it. They've only studied it by listening to conversations with people, by vaguely reading pieces of a review and just hammering something together. I get the feeling this is how most movies are made.
I think so. I think so.
There's no passion to this material at all.
No. They took a job, and Coogan is trying to bluff his way through. Like, he knows that it's the lead, and that's why he took the part.
Right.
And this was the first time I'd ever seen Steve Coogan, and the first time I'd ever seen a Michael Winterbottom film. And I kind of got hooked on.
I can't name another one. I can't name another Michael Winterbottom.
24-Hour Party People, which is interesting. That also paired he and Coogan. He's done a couple documentaries on Iraq. He's done. I started investigating.
Yeah, he did
and
Welcome
watching.
to Sarajevo.
And he's a very prolific and very odd director. He will go in a variety of directions. His career is not linear. He does dramas, he does comedies, he does documentaries, he does reenactment documentaries. He's very
But you can't
interesting.
look down his filmography and say, "Oh yeah, that." Yeah.
Right, exactly.
You can't pin him.
No. And but yeah, this was my first introduction, and this is what kind of got me onto really liking Steve Coogan. And I still haven't seen too much with Rob Brydon, but and Coogan's gotten really popular over the last few years, and rightfully so, because he is very funny, but he also has a very good dramatic streak. He was very good in Philomena. Should we bring up The Dinner? Because that is...
We just saw this last week. Steve Coogan is in a movie called The Dinner.
Ugh.
That is so bad. I have a feeling that the filmmaking that takes place in Tristram Shandy would have produced a movie like The Dinner.
Yeah, it's so scattershot and just all over the place.
It's about a bunch of boring people sitting around talking about nothing.
I genuinely don't think that anybody actually completes a sentence or a thought in the whole
No,
2
because
hour
they keep
movie.
getting interrupted by nonsense.
Right. So, unfortunately, that is one of Steve Coogan's dramatic roles that I don't know what he was going for. He has an American accent, so that's disarming initially, right away. And then I thought he had autism, but they're just kind of saying that he has some sort of a severe anxiety disorder. But he talks as though he has, like, Asperger's.
Yeah.
Like, so they're trying to treat him as an anxiety I didn't get it at all. And I watched
Meanwhile,
it all the way
there's this
through.
crime going on that they're dealing with, which if you were writing the story, you would have written it about the crime, not the idiots they're talking about. The movie is called The Dinner, and it's terrible.
It's really not good.
But again, I get the feeling that if what goes on in Tristram Shandy would have inspired a movie like that.
I think so.
because I love the idea. I just love this idea that they don't really know what they're dealing with. Because especially when Jenny comes in and she just lays out, she's trying to get into an intellectual conversation with Steve Coogan about it, and he clearly has no idea.
With the wrong people.
And I'm reminded there was one time there was an episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast where Zorak and Moltar are having this intense fanboy conversation about Star Wars. And Space Ghost once heard of it. It's like he just completely has no idea what they're talking about. It's kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when she goes through her dissertation about the meaning of this book and about the war and what war does to men's souls and all of this kind of stuff, they are just literally like, blink, blink. And then
they have no idea how to respond.
What was that all about?
And it doesn't help that every time Coogan enters a new room when they're doing this fake documentary behind the scenes, he gets a vodka tonic.
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually what prompted me. I had seen this so many times in one weekend that I had vodka tonics. That is now my signature drink. If I go places, I get a vodka tonic with lime.
You're kind of like the fans of the Big Lebowski.
Yeah,
in White Russian.
The White Russian. But I developed like a really strong taste for it. Now it's like what I drink when there's liquor around. It's like, do you have tonic? I'll have a vodka tonic. And I'd order it the way that he does. This was so meaningful to me in a lot of ways that it just ingrained itself into my life. And he just walks in, yeah, I'll have a vodka tonic. And sometimes it's a big glass, sometimes it's a small glass, but he's just drinking throughout this night. And his girlfriend comes with his son. His girlfriend is played by Kelly MacDonald, whom you'll know from Gosford Park, and she played Llewellyn Moss's wife in No Country for Old Men. Excellent Scottish actress. But Steve Coogan doesn't have any actual children, so this is all fake. Like it's not even based on reality. So they're still playing parts, and his girlfriend's name is Jenny too.
He's such a wise ass, but then you realize he knows nothing.
Right.
It's just these idiots who don't have any idea what they don't even manage their own life.
Right.
It's like, but they're so convinced. There's a scene that when he's talking to Jenny, and she brings up Fassbender.
Right.
You get the feeling that he might have once heard of someone named Fassbender, and maybe he worked on movies or something. You can see it in his eyes. You can see it in his eyes. He's so smart, but yet so dumb at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And I loved the interview that the magazine person comes to do, this in-depth article on him, and he's like, oh, this is me knowing you, knowing me, and he's like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. That was the catch line of his really famous character called Alan Partridge, that was a big television show in England for a long time, made Steve Coogan's career. And he's like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. He's like, I'm trying to get away from that. That's why I'm doing this movie, and that's why I'm going out on this. He's like, oh, okay, well, we won't.
That may be based on something I've heard, because apparently you don't mention like Hamlet do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actors do that. That's something I've never figured out. It's like, they don't. There are certain actors who don't want to embrace anything they did early in life.
Yeah, or they
when Ron Palillo absolutely refused to talk about Arnold Rorschach, Matt Cotter, and they refused to. They're so important now that they refuse to even acknowledge the early career that they had. Tom Hanks is the exact opposite.
Right.
Tom Hanks will talk about Turner and Hooch at the drop of a hat. The Money Pit. Any of that stuff.
Bosom buddies
and bosom buddies. But some actors they can't stand to even be.
Right, because they did that to kind of break in, but that's what they became most famous for. But they're
and
trying
that's what people
to
remember them for.
Uh-huh. and Coogan finally did go back to that character a few years ago with a film, but I think that was he was putting to bed. He did the series, and then he did some other limited series, and then he did a movie, and now I think he's done with that character. But yeah, he wants to be known for other things, and it's like any actor that gets hooked into one specific role. He's known for this, but he wants people to know him for more than that. It's like Alan Alda is forever Hawkeye Pierce, or
and he barely talks about it, and that's apparently the one thing anybody wants to talk about.
Right, because it's what they know him from.
You spent 11 years playing this character, so yeah, they want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And he blows it off by always saying the same thing. He always blows it off by just kind of giving a little bit of information. It's always the same comment, and you can tell he wants to move on to like his directing career and that kind of stuff. It's like, no, people want to talk about MASH. They don't care about Sweet Liberty. They don't care about Same Time Next Year.
So,
but I digress.
Yes, again. So this movie it's hard to pin down, but it's kind of episodic, but every episode really wonderfully blends in with the next scene, but yet it's all kind of disjointed and out of whack, but it all follows each other. It all follows in a really kind of sensible progression, even though it's jumping around in both time and narrative, and like Coogan is either playing himself, a version of himself, Tristram Shandy or Walter Shandy. At any given point, you can kind of tell the difference between Walter and Tristram, because Tristram has a broken nose that he got from the forceps when he was being born.
Oh my God, can we talk about the forceps? The baby is about to be born. The wife is upstairs screaming her head off because she's in labor. And I mean labor with a capital L. And they're downstairs, and the doctor is talking about these instruments that he's going to use, and he gets these forceps.
New invented.
And he gets the father to clasp his hands together.
It's Toby. It's Toby.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these, and he puts the forceps around, and he pulls the skin off of his hand.
He's like, "Oh, you've ripped the skin off the back of my hand and turned my knuckle to jelly in the bargain."
And then he tries it with a melon.
He's like, "Yeah, the baby's head is more like a pap of a melon." And he's like, "Get a melon." And he starts to do this, and it crushes the melon.
And the juice just goes all over the place. It's like they're making it worse and worse and worse. And then they go and they use it on the baby, and they break his nose.
Because he has it in the wrong spot, and he kind of pushes down and pulls, and he snaps his nose, and they're trying to find something to brace it with. And which leads into why I called Jerry Trismegistus in the beginning.
She screws it up because she gets... He tells her what... She's demanding to know what the name is going to be.
Right, because the Tristram is turning black, and they don't think he's going to live. Right, and he is presented with the opportunity to name him Trismegistus, which is a great philosopher, or after Toby. And he if he was sure that the baby was going to die, he would have given Toby the honor and named him after Toby. but he couldn't be sure, so he's like, I'll Trismegistus, and he tells that to the maid, who runs from one end of the hallway to the other, and gets to the priest, and
She keeps repeating it to herself.
Keeps repeating it, and she messes it up, and she's like, Tristram, but there's a Gistus. He's like, no, there's no Gistus in it. It's my name, and it's a fine name. He's like, no, it's Tristram Gistus, and she's like, no, and he is explaining to Toby. He's like, oh, Toby is like, oh, Tristram is a wonderful name. He's like, no, Tristram is the dog's breath. It's the worst. And he ends up with a son named Tristram, and they're sitting there, Tristram Shandy, and he sits there and he's like, oh, he was cursed from his this child has been cursed from his conception.
You know, yeah, here's the thing. Part of me wants to see the disaster that they filmed.
Yeah.
Because I really want to know how in the world they fit the womb model into this story.
Don't they end up saying that they're going to cut it?
There's something like that. But the whole thing is, there's a scene where Steve Coogan is trying out this model of this womb. And we talked about this earlier, where he's on a harness and they put him upside down and they lower him down into this womb. It's got a window on it. He calls it a womb with a view. And while he's inside this womb, and his face is turning red, the blood is rushing to his head, and he says, well, why don't we just put me in it right side up and then flip the image? And he says, well, I'll have to talk to the director. The guy says, well, I'll have to talk to the director about it. He says, he wanted realism. And he says, I'm a grown man in a fucking womb, and he wants realism.
This is that's the kind of thing that goes on throughout the whole thing.
What's interesting about that scene to me is that the model of the womb that they've got, first of all, looks horrendous.
Yes.
As it would. And it's like out in the middle of a field.
It's in a barn.
When you see it, yeah, it's like out in the middle of a field, and it looks horrifying. Yeah, and then you see it in the studio, and it's like they're lowering him down into this thing, and he's terribly uncomfortable. You know, of course he's on a harness and all this.
And then until when you see the end of the movie, when it's back in this field, because they first start and it's in this barn where they do the test, but then they do it out in a field, and they actually like have this goo, and he's being born, and in the middle of this field. It's so. They have no idea what they want in this whole process.
And I still can't figure out how that's going to fit into the movie.
I don't think they did either. I think, and I've always wondered about this, and I haven't watched the commentary, or if I did, it was a long time ago.
Oh, now there's some irony for you. Here's a movie that's a fake documentary about the making of a book that was unfilmable, and yet on the DVD you have behind the scenes documentary about the making of a fake documentary. It's surrounded around insanity.
It's levels and levels and levels, and if I remember the commentary right, it's just Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan just doing more of their one-upmanships. It's really, they're not even talking about the movie. If I remember,
we also got to talk about that sense of humor, because the British sense of humor is something that Americans just don't have. That sense of humor is unique to them, and they have that dry sense of humor. The way I love it when they tell Rob Brydon that Gillian Anderson is going to play the Widow Wada, and he says, don't understand. He says, I can't act. And Coogan says, I know that. He says, with Gillian Anderson. He can't act with her because he's sexually attracted to her.
Right.
And then she plays a character who's sexually attracted to him.
And he has to dance around it because he knows absolutely nothing about women. All Uncle Toby can talk about is the Battle of Namur. That's it. That's all he knows in life. He's obsessed with it. The doctor's trying to get prepped to deliver the baby, and he's trying to show him detailed maps and just talking about it, and just nobody cares.
There's no interest in anything else.
Right, that's it. And even with the widow Wadman, he's just talking about the battle. He has no concept of anything outside of that battle.
And she's giving all of these indicators that she wants to have sex with him, all of this sexual innuendo. Meanwhile, Bryden is sexually attracted to her, and he can't act on it because the character is such a fop that he cares about his stupid battle. You know? See, here's where we're running into a problem. If you were with us last week, we ran into this massive problem where we were talking about, we got this dumb idea to start talking about Young Frankenstein. The problem with talking about a movie like Young Frankenstein is the same problem you run into talking about Tristram Shandy, is that all you end up doing is quoting it
and just recounting the different because and that might be that there's no other movie like this, which I think is what has made it endure for
maybe
me.
Spinal Tap.
But Spinal Tap is all fake documentary.
Yeah.
There's not a part in it where they're trying to make a different movie. So
well, now this is a fake documentary because it's about these two guys. You know,
right, but they do parts of the book too. Like when it first comes up, you see them in the makeup chairs, but then it goes into a good 25-30 minutes of the book. And then it cuts and you go back and it's kind of it's a surprising cut because you think that it's going to go on like it had been a very breaking the fourth wall, self-referential adaptation of this book, and then all of a sudden it's a fake documentary and you're like, whoa. And then you've got to get your feet back, you've got to get your bearings back, and then it spends a lot of time in that world, and then it goes back to what would have been the final edition of the movie,
right?
With people playing parts and stuff. It's so there's really nothing else quite like it, and it's stuck in my mind for all these years, and I rewatch it as often as I can, because it's just so unique. It's absolutely, and it takes the spirit of the book that never got around to actually telling its intended story and makes a fake film about the making of a film. They never get around to making the whole movie.
And
they don't even right, yeah, they don't even get around to finishing the fake documentary. Or the narrative feature.
There is something in my heart, a love in my heart for movies about the making of a movie.
Oh yeah.
Because if you know anything about movie sets, you know it's a closed world, and it exists. It's this world, this hermetically sealed world that exists for a few weeks or a few months. And what goes on inside of that world can often be surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I think that would be a good topic for an episode covering movies that fiction movies that are about the making of movies.
Yes.
So
yeah. I've got a very good one coming up there in our recommendations. And I love films about filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's, inside of that little hermetically sealed world, there are all these egos. There are all these creative clashes. There are all these timetables. And it all exists on top of, and it's not quite in this movie, but it all exists on top of having to deal with people on the higher echelon who have no idea what you're trying to do. The studio, the producer, all of that, the people, the money people, who have no idea what you're trying to do.
Right.
It's a fascinating little world. Anytime I can ever see a movie about the making of a movie, I'm there. We're going to talk about one in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about Truffaut's films.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the films I'm looking forward to that I've not seen yet is Day for Night.
Yeah.
Which is about the making of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the things that always is really fascinating to me about the movie, is the process. Because it's amazing if you ever go into the making of any movie, how any movie ever gets made.
It's really quite remarkable that these things actually get produced, and so many of them in a year.
Yeah. There are, 250 major releases a year. How in the world any of that ever happened, I don't know.
Because the sets are just chaos.
Sets are chaos.
I mean,
actors' egos you got to deal with. You got to deal with every dime and penny, especially if you're low budget.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're a big budget.
Mm-hmm.
And there's time wasted. There's this, and this, and nothing ever goes as planned.
No.
And this is the real head spinner. Movies are shot out of sequence.
Mm-hmm.
That would drive me crazy. That would drive me crazy. I know how my head is.
Think about that as an actor, where you have to be, like, if day one is the climax, and you barely know this character, and you have to muster everything for this climactic sequence, and then as you go along, you end up filming at the beginning of the movie, where you're now more familiar with the character than you were at the end of the, or it's like back-to-back days. It's like, yeah, it's.
You've got to be Brando after the first scene you shoot is Brando after Sonny is murdered.
Right.
And then you've got to go back and you've got to be Brando has to be Vito Corleone at the wedding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then he has to be Vito Corleone after he comes back from the hospital. It's got to be crazy. Like, you've got to place yourself where you are, emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, how in the world this works, I don't know. This is why I don't work in movies. Honestly, I had a dream at the beginning of in my youth to be a filmmaker.
Me too.
But then I realized the crap you got to go through to get there. And even if you make a successful movie, the next one better be a success too, or nobody will hire you.
What's the old line? Is you're only as good as your next picture?
You're only as good as your next picture. I like Woody Allen's idea. Woody Allen's idea is he tells the studio, okay, I want $2 million in a brown paper bag, put it in a secure location, and then go away.
Yeah. I'm not going to show you my script. I'm not going to give you casting.
No
I'm not going to tell you who. You're not going to see any bit of it until it's done. I'm just going to go off. I'm going to make whatever I want, and you're going to distribute it after you give me the money to make it.
I can't think of another director who has that kind of clout.
Not that's still alive.
Hitchcock.
Hitchcock sort of did until he started having some flops in the 60s. Yeah. Kubrick had that amazing deal post 2001 with Warner Brothers. They said, we don't care how long it takes, we don't care what you do, we will give you all the money you need for whatever project you want to do, which is what led to A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut. He didn't have to worry about a distributor. He didn't have to worry about where the money was going to come from. It was all guaranteed in his contract, and there was not a contract like that after, except maybe Clint Eastwood and Warner Brothers, and there has not been one since, really. Orson Welles' first contract with RKO that was really, really violated by RKO. But it's what gave us Citizen Kane. And if he'd have had that same freedom for the 3 movies that he was supposed to, we might have had 3 movies that were Citizen Kane or better.
Citizen Kane, yeah. Well, and it also comes to this, that if you know and you're a director whose name will sell a movie, which is very rare, Spielberg can sell a movie.
Yeah. Scorsese.
Woody Allen can sell a movie. Scorsese can sell a movie. Without, a lot of stuff. Because if you just say it's a Scorsese picture or it's a Spielberg picture or it's a Woody Allen picture, people know what they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that a director like David Fincher, who is well respected, has to work a little harder. Because not everybody quite knows who David Fincher is. But
Christopher Nolan.
Christopher Nolan's getting better, though.
Mm-hmm.
People know, and we're starting to get to this point where we now know directors who are not superstar directors a little more. Everybody who knows anything about movies, current movies, knows who Zack Snyder is.
Mm-hmm.
We know who David Fincher is. We know who
Paul Thomas Anderson.
Wes Anderson, yeah. The Coen brothers.
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah. So as we learn more and more, and this has happened since the internet, as we get more and more, and we learn more and more about movies, and we get more interested in movies, the idea of the superstar director is beginning to dim just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to sell it to Cletus and Jolene, the people who don't follow movies. And I'm not generalizing. I'm just saying you have to sell it to an audience that only goes to 3 movies a year.
Right.
And they're still going to know who Spielberg is.
They're going to know who Quentin Tarantino is.
Yeah, they'll know who Tarantino is. Yeah. So you still have to sell it to that audience. And as I've always said, and we've talked about this before, movies will always be 2 things: art and commerce.
Right.
And they are squabbling siblings fighting for space.
Right.
Commerce almost always wins.
Regrettably, yes.
Because money talks.
Yes. Very loudly.
Very loudly. And one of the, millennials, if you really want to know film history, the reason that we have so much emphasis on money right now, and the reason that the blockbuster mentality, and the reason studio executives basically run Hollywood instead of the artists, can really be pinpointed to a movie called Heaven's Gate, which was a $40 million bomb.
Back when $40 million was a big budget.
Back when $40 million was a big budget. Well, it was a Western. $40 million for a Western. And the movie went way over budget. It was like 6 months over budget. And it was all because of the director's ego. And after that, and it basically destroyed United Artists.
Right.
Which was a studio that was founded by Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford in the early part of the century.
And D.W. Griffith.
To where the studio would be run by the talent. United Artists.
Right.
It stood.
They'd find the money, they wouldn't interfere.
Drop the bag of money, drop $2 million and go away.
Pretty much. And it worked for a long time.
Until this movie.
Yeah.
And after during the 70s, there was the New Hollywood, where the artists basically were becoming superstars.
And they had the run of the studios as well as the independent areas.
This was Coppola, Spielberg, Scorsese, Robert Altman, George Lucas. And when Heaven's Gate basically destroyed United Artists, studio execs said, we now run the show.
Right. And that ushered in the shameless commercialism of the 80s.
Which has mistakenly often been blamed on Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. It was the studios reasserting control in the 80s. And then in the 90s there was that big independent boom, but they were independent, but they were still big budgeted studio films with stars. They were just not from the main they were independent because they weren't from the main studios.
Right.
And that was pretty much it. But they still had big stars, and that's been kind of like faux indie for 20 years, 25 years. And then the studios reasserted their control in the 2000s, and they're just like, this is about money. And that's why there's all those tent poles. That's why if a movie doesn't do back its entire budget plus a profit in its opening weekend, it's considered a flop, which I have always hated.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
When you look down the list, you see that some of the best movies out there aren't even on the top 20.
Right.
Just because it's in the top 10, just because it's in the top 3, doesn't mean it's a good movie. What that means, when you see that Monday morning, that crap that they come up with is
good marketing. That's what it is.
It's great marketing.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've been able to shovel a brand name.
Right.
Because I guarantee you, because Batman v Superman opened at number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a terrible movie. You know, just because it makes a lot of money doesn't mean the movie's any damn good.
Right. And just because it doesn't make much money doesn't mean that it's no good.
Because Transformers will make a lot of money. But that doesn't mean it's a good movie.
Except for the last one.
Right.
What was it? The 5th one? The last something or other? The last night or something like that.
I haven't kept up with the Transformers.
I haven't. I think I've seen the first 2, maybe 3. But this one, they put it in. It was this huge investment, and it tanked. And they were going to make a 6th one, but once it started to fail, they started advertising that it was the last one. Like after it had been out in theaters for like 2 weeks, they were like, the final chapter of the Transformers saga. It's like, oh, it's going away! Yay! Finally, people rejected it. Well, it'll lay dormant for a few years, and then they'll try to reboot it.
Yeah, they do this occasionally. Now, I am not one to sling mud at tentpole movies ever.
No, I usually love a lot of them.
I love a lot of tentpole movies. You'll catch me on the weekend. I mean, I'm going out this weekend to see Coco, the new Pixar film. And forgive me if you're listening to this 10 years in advance.
Well, even when this drops, Coco is going to be probably almost on Blu-ray.
And if you're listening to this 10 years in advance, hello, 2027. But yeah, Coco, I'm going to see it because I love Pixar. I love the creative juice out there, the creative juice that's in film, even in the big budget films. I love the Marvel movies.
So do I.
And frankly, some people are getting tired of those. But it's a property that's been handled with loving care.
Mm-hmm.
And they've made good movies, generally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's been this canon, and now I think the last one we saw was Ragnarok.
Right.
And out of this canon, there maybe been 1 or 2 that I haven't liked. But they've done very well.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing goes, fingers are crossed, for Star Wars.
Yes.
Disney has bought this property, and they've given it to people who care.
Mm-hmm. People who love the movies, the original movies, and they want to. It's been their lifelong dream to direct a Star Wars movie, and now they're doing that, and they're in this canon. And when you get people like Gareth Edwards and now, well, Ron Howard,
Rian Johnson,
and Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, who were all born and saw Star Wars in the theater when they were kids.
Again and again and again and again.
Again and again. And most of them mark that experience as what made them want to become filmmakers. And now they're making Star Wars movies. They're living out their dreams and their fantasies, and in incredible ways, because we're recording this before The Last Jedi comes out, but we're posting it after The Last Jedi comes out. So forgive the ignorance here, but we have no possible way of seeing that just yet. But I loved The Force Awakens. I loved Rogue One, and I love Rian Johnson. His we're going to talk about Brick at some point, his debut feature, which you also have not seen, which is excellent. Maybe even the Brothers Bloom and Looper.
I've seen his films. I've seen the style that he has. I love Looper. Rian Johnson, it was really
Looper
good.
was good. Yeah.
Brick, I have, but I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, it's magnificent.
But I've heard
I love that movie. I've seen that a dozen times. But and you get people that are, and he's going to be out now developing his own trilogy with new characters, which I'm really hoping that it goes into the Old Republic.
Yeah.
But I don't know where he's gonna take it. But it's exciting, and it explains why he turned down Episode 9.
Well, again, I don't blame other people.
No, I tend to really enjoy the tentpole stuff.
One of the most persistent complaints about Hollywood, and again, I'm not one of these guys who demonizes Hollywood for making big budget films.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the most persistent complaints is that nowadays they've run out of creativity, and they're remaking and rebooting everything,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like they're so stuck to brand names they can't come up with a new idea.
And
I
sequeling
think part of that, what?
Sequeling and
Sequeling everything to death and rebooting everything to death,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a persistent problem, because they're so, like I said, they're so stuck to brand names.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to come up with anything original and new.
Because
and,
they know what sells, so they want to make money, so they repackage and rebrand something that already made a lot of money, and then they end up making a lot of money on it again.
Mm-hmm. And that's become a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always said that Hollywood is on the downslide in that respect. I say Hollywood is a general term. I shouldn't do that. The film industry,
yes,
generally. But there are good movies out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all sequels and remakes. But one of the things I love about a movie like Tristram Shandy is that it shows you how hard it is to get anything made.
Yeah, like we were talking about before. It's easy to envision this as a realistic representation of a modern day film set, where there's a break, so the actor has to go and do a test for the next scene, and then go right from there to an interview, and then because there's always the marketing aspect of it taking place, so they have to do these interviews, and they do these behind the scenes things where they talk about the movie, but they're not even done shooting it, so they haven't seen a final cut, so they have no idea what it's going to end up like.
And they have to do these junkets,
right?
Which is not journalism; it's just sound bites.
Mm-hmm.
But you see scenes in this film which you could believe would happen. There's a scene in the movie, it's late in the film, where they're trying to exacerbate the character's malady by putting a hot chestnut in.
Well, there's a scene in the book where something happens that a hot chestnut gets thrown into I think Walter's pants,
Yeah.
And that's actually in the book. So they know that this is part of the book, and they know that this is a scene that they're going to have to do. So they're trying to rehearse. Coogan and Bryden are Bryden's helping Coogan with this, and they're like trying to pantomime it, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, why don't we get a real fire roasted chestnut and use that? Ignoring the fact, of course, that these are blazing hot, and they drop it into Coogan's pants, and it is searing him with pain, and he finally gets it out, and he's like, oh God, that's horrible. And they're about to shoot the scene, and they're like, yeah, we're cutting that scene. And he's like, what? After he scorched his crotch for it. They're not gonna do it.
I want to say, by the way, the irony is not lost on me that we are digressing.
Yeah, I'm actually really pleased that we digressed so often, and I still feel like we were talking about the movie when we were talking about the movie or talking about not the movie. I feel like we were still on track with our conversation, which is remarkable to me. But as with anything, all good things must come to an end, and I'm going to say, Jerry, what are your recommendations based off of this incredibly unique picture?
I would recommend almost any film that is about the behind the scenes making, not a behind the scenes documentary, but just anything that is stories about the making of films are always interesting.
Mm.
There is a movie that I kind of fell in love with a few years ago, 1970, called Alice in Wonderland, about a film director who has made a great film, and he's trying to he's under the struggle of trying to duplicate that success.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to make this movie. It's not going well, and it's really, really funny, and it's a really good movie. It's called Alice in Wonderland. I think you'll really like it. Also, probably the best film ever made about a filmmaker is 8½, which is probably the only Fellini film that I've ever seen more than once.
Yeah, and it's a great picture.
It's a great picture, and it's about the celebrity that followed him.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, on that vein, there's also, like we mentioned, Day for Night. There's a really weird Roman Coppola movie that's about the making of a movie called CQ that came out in about 2001 that is very bizarre, but also quite good. Anything else that you have for recommendations?
Double this with Spinal Tap. If you have to do a double feature, duplicate this with, watch this with Spinal Tap, and anything directed by Christopher Guest. I am a huge fan of Christopher Guest. Waiting for Guffman is one of the best comedies I've ever seen.
I've always been more partial to Best in Show.
Best in Show,
and
for your consideration,
A Mighty Wind.
A Mighty Wind. Any of the Christopher Guest films, they're very much in the spirit of Tristram Shandy. And that sensibility, the things that go on behind the scenes, and the insanity.
Yes. And
it's probably blown up a little bit larger than it would in real life, obviously, but it's really, really funny.
Right. My recommendations are, I have two movies that are actually spiritual follow-ups to this, both directed by Michael Winterbottom, both starring Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon, that take this one-upmanship of them just having their conversations and trying to be better than the other to theatrical length. One of them is called The Trip, and the other one is called The Trip to Italy. Basically, the story behind that is that Coogan got kind of hired to do a TV series or something about small local food establishments in like North England and then in Italy, And there is a television series that this was on. They cut it into a movie, and it's just him and Rob Brydon just going back and forth for like 90 minutes, trying to redo their impressions of each of that they both do. Like Michael Caine, they each do this Michael Caine impression. It's like a 5.5, 6 minute, 7 minute sequence of them just going back and forth with Michael Caine impressions, and young Michael Caine and old Michael Caine.
They did the same thing in this, trying to do impressions of Pacino.
Al Pacino.
Yeah.
They're sitting in that van, and he's like, yes, I've got some scripts from America, and then from the back of the van comes Rob Brydon. Fuck you, asshole. Fuck you, asshole.
Speaking of Pacino, one last recommendation is a movie called Looking for Richard.
Ooh, yeah.
It's a documentary about Pacino trying to put on a performance of Richard III.
Yeah.
He keeps having to stop and explain the story to the actors.
And that was his directorial debut, if I'm not too much mistaken.
It was. It's a very, very good movie.
Yeah, another one that has this blurred image of performance and rehearsal would be Vanya on 42nd Street, that was directed by Louis Malle. That you start off in this plainclothes rehearsal of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya, and it moves into what you later realize is actually the stage performance.
Yeah.
And
very creative.
Yeah, it's incredibly creative. I think that was Louis Malle's last film. He died not too long after that. So yeah, those are our recommendations, and of course, Tristram Shandy, A Cock and Bull Story, which we have not ruined for you in any way because it is impossible to encapsulate this movie.
And it contains all three, as I said in the beginning. All three of those things are in this movie.
Yeah, it's hilarious, and it's unique. It's wonderfully crafted. It's unexpected. Even if you've seen it the dozen times that I have, it's still, when it transitions, you remember one transition being earlier, but it's really later, and back and forth. It's a magnificent picture. So we thank you very much for listening to us on our discussion of Tristram Shandy, A Cock and Bull Story. Jerry, what do we have coming up next week?
Next week, we are dipping our toes for the first time into the pool of Scorsese.
And not the last time.
And not the last time. We had a lot of Scorsese to talk about.
Yes,
but oddly enough, my first selection for Scorsese is not Goodfellas. It's not Raging Bull. It's not Taxi Driver. It is The King of Comedy.
Which is a very overlooked masterpiece.
Very overlooked film, and a very disturbing film.
Incredibly so.
So we're going to explore that and ask the question, is it even a comedy?
I think it is, but yes, we'll talk about that. And so that about wraps it up for us. You can find all of our back episodes at www.thepodbaydoorspodcast.wordpress.com. I am Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com. Signing off for myself and my co-host Jerry Dean Roberts, critic for ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com, and OverThinkingOscars.com. You can find me on Twitter at TalkMovieToMe1, and Jerry on Twitter at ArmchairCMA. We thank you very much. Give us your likes, your recommendations, your comments, everything to that effect. We are always happy to interact with our listeners. Thank you very much, and the pod bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.